Right, Eric, welcome to this deep dive session regarding identity management. We as Yenlo, we are many times involved in complex identity management projects with customers all over the world. And doing so, we are most of the time confronted with interesting questions with respect of identity management in a general sense, but also with CIAM. And one of the questions customers confront me with, Ruben, what is the difference exactly? What's now the difference between identity management and CIAM? So you obviously, with more than 35 years of very deep, relevant IT experience, I think you are the guy, the visionary who can provide those answers. So in the coming 60 minutes, it will be great and an honor to deep dive in this topic and understand your vision, and hopefully you can help explain to our customers what CIAM actually is. So I hope you're okay with that.
Ruben, thank you so much for inviting me. It's really a pleasure to talk with you. Very happy to do what I can to answer these questions. I had in my 35 years been involved a few times with identity management projects, and I'm very involved with the future direction of these products here at WSO2 now that I've been here almost a year. So happy to answer your questions, do what I can to help.
Great, thanks for that. So to start, how do you define CIAM actually? Because I think it's a misunderstood concept. Can you elaborate a little bit on CIAM and what is the concept actually?
Yes, thanks for restating the question. CIAM is a specialization of identity access management. So identity access management is all about your user ID, your password, your two-factor authentication, your login, your single sign-on, all of these kinds of things. And I think most people are familiar with this as an employee. You get the username and a password to log into the corporate system, and all this is managed by the corporate identity access management system. But now that we're moving more towards the digital age, when the products that we provide to our customers, our company, as a company, we provide products to our customers, then we have to get their identities, have them sign up, register with us on our website, create a username and password so they can access us. And I think everyone's very well familiar with how many passwords and usernames we have on all the websites that we use, and there's special products to manage this. But that's the area we're talking about, is the customer identity access management. All of those usernames and passwords that you have to use to access all of those websites and mobile apps for your access to all the different functions they provide. And as we were saying, because there's so many of them, now we have so many different applications, so many functions we're doing on the phone, over the web. All of these have to be very carefully controlled with the username and password, and that's the customer identity access management piece of it.
So actually, it's getting, as a customer, it's getting more clear and easier for me as a customer when I listen correctly, right?
We would hope so. The trend is to allow you to reuse some of these credentials. So I don't know if you're like me, but I have a long password protected file that has all my passwords in it. And every time I forget one, I have to go and look in the file. I really should get one of these little devices, I think, or maybe an app. There's an app for this now, I know. And the sense of getting it easier is that now companies such as WSO2, who are in the identity access management space, are providing a federation of IDs, so that if you have your Facebook ID, your Google ID, your GitHub ID, you can start to use these over and over again as the ID. Maybe you have a different password, but at least you have the same ID for different sites that you log into. So it's a bit of consolidation going on there.
Yeah, that sounds convenient for me as a customer in the end. So maybe that's also one element. I think a lot of technology companies or customers of WSO2, maybe they misunderstand the full scope or the full capabilities of CIAM. So do you agree with that not everybody understands the full scope of it?
I suppose so. If somebody's especially approaching this, you know, before I joined WSO2, I worked at Citi, and we had a very extensive identity access management system full of authorization roles and responsibilities developed, customized for Citi employees. And the natural thought was, okay, let's just take what we have internally and push it outside and use the same system for our customers of our APIs and our websites and our mobile apps and all of these things we were doing to deliver the digital experience of banking to our customers. But it was a bit the wrong idea because you really need to rethink the whole process and the whole mechanism of how it works in the terms of how the customers see it. If you're an employee, you have, of course, no choice but to use your company's access management system. But if you're a customer, you may get frustrated if it's too hard to register, too hard to log in, if it's making things difficult for you. So it does take a different approach and a kind of a rethink of the right way to do it. I'll give you one example from Citi. We were struggling always with the question, should we have multi-factor authentication for our consumer website? And I think to this day, we don't require it, even though it would be more secure and would prevent break-ins. It was seen as a customer experience detractor to require this on that website.
I can imagine that indeed.
Yeah. On the mobile app, of course, though, we do have support for fingerprint and biometrics and so on.
Biometrics,
so, yeah.
You actually touched it briefly, but it sounds like CIAM is an important piece of the puzzle when you talk about digital journey, what you mentioned, or the digital transformation. So, do you agree? And if so, how does CIAM fit in the digital transformation for customers?
Well, what we want to do is make it very easy for customers to sign up for a new website or a new app. Make it as simple and easy and straightforward as possible to put in the username and the password, but still as secure as possible. And a lot of the trends that we're looking at in this area have to do with relying much more on biometrics and much less on text-based passwords. In fact, there's a trend even toward passwordless authentication, which we are going to be, evaluating at the moment and going to be offering sometime in the future. And this has to do much more with exchange of keys for cryptographic security of login, as opposed to using some username and password combination that may be hard to remember for the users.
And then, as a customer of a website or a mobile app, I can actually log in without a password, but then somehow my identity is authenticated in a different way. That's what you say, right?
It's relying on the authentication of the phone, of the device. You authenticate yourself to the device, and you make sure the device is secure. And there's a lot of work in this area, both in Google and Apple, to make sure the devices themselves can be trusted. And once you log in there as a trusted device, then you can use this trust to build on the next level to do the passwordless authentication handshake from the mobile device. I'm not sure we're going to see it on the web. It might be it's much more difficult to collect.
It's via the device. Yeah. That sounds like very convenient for the consumer in the end. So I think that's a really step forward. And all of this is possible due to CIAM.
It's just part of CIAM. It's an aspect of CIAM, absolutely. There are standards bodies working on this. FIDO is working on this. And there's other committees. I can't think of them right now, but this will be done in a standardized way across the industry, which is why it's taking a little bit of time to really come to fruition. But this will be part of the CIAM trend, absolutely, where customers of mobile apps, mobile devices, can simplify their access to the applications while preserving the security that we all need as much as ever, if not more so today, because this world is just completely crazy with hacking and incidents and break-ins and this kind of thing.
Unfortunately.
Yeah.
And
so
obviously, WSO2 has got to be honest, state-of-the-art solution for this, the WSO2 Identity Server, but also some new things like identity in the cloud, what's going on at the moment. But besides the technology, can you help out customers? How do they get started with CIAM? Where should they start to implement this philosophy actually?
Well, I want to talk a little bit about security as code in the answer to your question.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Customers. This is something we were working on at Citi when I was working as the head of security architecture and strategy in the consumer bank. We wanted to try to push everything left, as they say in the industry, to help the developers at the beginning of the development cycle include the security in their builds, in their automated pipelines, in their deploy pipelines, their deploy automation. To give the contrast to this, as a security architecture team, we had to review and sign off on all the deployments, especially of customer and externally facing apps, to ensure the security was up to standard and appropriately done. And often, and sometimes, we would have a development team come to us 2 weeks before production and say, oh, we need to get somebody to review this. Can you sign off, please? And we would look at it and say, no, you haven't done the authentication right. The encryption libraries are wrong. You have to go and fix this. And of course, they would get very upset because they're going to miss the deadline. On the other hand, you would get teams who would come to us early in the development cycle and say, what is it we have to do to conform to the security standards and policies that Citi has, so that when we go to production, everything is done correctly and the reviews will go smoothly, because they would know of the review process and they would anticipate what they have to do. And this is what we were trying to encourage. And we were trying to encourage it by creating as much security in code as possible to give the developers, while they were developing the application, so they could include it in the development process, so that by the time it got to the review, ideally, we would be looking at the logs of the automated build and deploy pipeline and check, just to have a check to make sure everything was included that they were supposed to include. So one of the big focus points for WSO2 is to make it very easy for developers to work in their IDE and include the right libraries and SDKs for mobile apps for customer identity access management. And it can be used for employee identity access management as well. We have some cases where our customers are using it across the board. But our focus is on this kind of newer area that people are trying to tackle. They need to consider the customer's point of view as opposed to the employee's point of view, which is probably the starting point.
Yeah, and very early actually already in the software development stage, and not one thing you do at the end when you go live. It should be from scratch, built in the solution software developers are building actually.
Exactly. I compare this to user interface design. This is also something you cannot build in after the fact. You have to think about it from the beginning. How is the user interface going to look? What are the interaction points? What are the mouse clicks? What's the touch screen? How does that all work? And you want to have a great user experience for anybody using an app. I'm sure we've all used apps that are very intuitive, and it's like they anticipate what you're going to do next and present you with the information, present you with the choice that you need to make, and make it very easy to click and touch. And other interfaces that you just completely cannot tell what's going on. You know, on the other end of the spectrum, you're searching through, what am I supposed to do next? It's not presented to you very clearly. This kind of thing has to be done very early in the process and done right to get the right experience. And it's the same with customer identity access management, same with security in general. It has to be done early in the process. The design has to be there. The understanding has to be there. What are we trying to accomplish? I was in one program at Citi with Google where they were putting the Citi banking app on top of Google Pay. And we had created a specialization of our APIs for this purpose, because normally our APIs are connecting to our mobile app, our web app, but here we had to connect to the Google server. In this case, Google was using their UI. They were having the relationship with the customer. They were doing the customer certification, all of the security checks, and then they were passing all the information to us in the APIs for the checks they had done. We were used to doing that ourselves with the APIs, support of our mobile app and our web app. And we had to design a special authentication federation. And this had to be done very early because it was a foundational piece of the design, because it had implications not only for the security of these APIs, but also for the fraud processing. So we could pass to the fraud engine that we had a strong, what we call the level 3 authentication. And therefore, we would not have to trigger a fraud analysis on every transaction of a certain value. If we didn't have this level of authentication, we'd have to trigger the fraud process. So there's often always some additional implications of getting this authentication design done correctly in the beginning, because then you can also give confidence to people who are worried about the security of the APIs, security of the app. Maybe we have to check for fraud or risk or something like this, which are also becoming bigger considerations. So it's very important to settle all of these questions as early as possible.
So let's call it security by design, actually. So you bring in the security on the early stage, security by design, and not something you do in the after stage. Well, I'm a huge technology fan, so it sounds very good to me. But it also sounds like a huge investment in time and in the end in budget. So what can you tell to customers regarding the ROI on this when they start implementing CIAM? What is your idea around the return on investment here?
Generally speaking, you have, to maybe oversimplify, you can have a choice to build or to buy something like this. And way back early in my career, I actually built something like this for Solomon Ski because I didn't have a chance to buy something. I was building an application for them for the warehouse management, and we had to create all the identity access management and all of the authorization roles by ourselves. And then when we went external and the website was published, we had to add in the customer identity access management on top of this. And so there was a lot of rework, a lot of rethinking, a lot of redesign, and a lot of ongoing maintenance. So I think if you buy a solution that provides these things out of the box, it gives you a better time to market and a lower cost of development and maintenance over time. Forrester did a study for us that proved conclusively there's a better ROI of having a central solution as opposed to having each application develop it for themselves, which is another way of understanding the economy of these solutions.
And when I'm a security officer inside the company, do I have some benefits by centralizing it, for instance, or does it bring a benefit for a security officer, for instance?
Well, yes, of course, we want to have the common policy and the common process and the common standards that everyone is using. You don't want to have to settle this question multiple times. You want to say, what is the right policy for the external access to our systems? Do we always require multi-factor authentication to make sure we have the right level of security? In the institutional bank, for example, we always did this. And we gave a safe word card for a secure key that you always had to type in addition to your username, password. That was just the policy. We had one way of doing it. And when we would go, and my team in those days, I was running the architecture team for the institutional bank before I moved to consumer bank. We would go from application to application and make sure things were done according to the right standard and the right process and the right policy, some of which was set by a corporate security team, some of which was we decided on our own. And I have a bit of a funny story about this, where we were working on this for our corporate credit cards to put in the two-factor authentication to make it more secure for people to log in and manage their credit cards. And we got a nice letter from the U.S. Congress. Citi does the credit cards for them, and they said, "Oh, we noticed the recent break-ins at Target and J.P. Morgan, and please tell us we're not going to have the same problem with you." We're like, "Oh, please give us a couple more weeks. We need to finish this." But thankfully, nothing happened.
That's a great story indeed. Well, it actually proves that security and especially CIAM is the next level. I think we are all waiting for. But once again, although I think I understand, but maybe for people watching this interview, can you make a clear distinction between CIAM and traditional identity access management? So what are the key takeaways and the key differences between those two methods? Yeah,
identity access management is the overarching category of these the capabilities that we are talking about. So some of them will be the same for internal employee use, and some will be the same for external customer use. But in particular, for the external customer use, it becomes part of the experience the customer has in accessing you as a company, accessing you, dealing with you, interacting with you as a company is what I should say. And especially in these days where the digital experience, the bar is so high for a lot of the companies that have gone digital, and you can talk about the leaders such as Uber and Amazon's website and Airbnb and Netflix, and they all give this great digital experience, people getting used to this. So you need to consider this when you're delivering your digital projects to the customers to give your unique differentiation. Everything needs to be a great experience, and your customer identity access management needs to be smooth, efficient as possible, while still maintaining the security standards that customers are going to expect when they trust you with their information. So you have these additional considerations of, you're out on the web, you're in the wild world, not inside the controlled confines of the company, and you're presenting something to people that may or may not have a good experience that will determine in part whether they want to do business with you. and making the customer identity access management as simple and easy as possible, and also simple and easy possible to implement for the developers, is something that we really try to focus on, because it makes a difference when you present your face to the customer, your digital face, that it's something easy, that's pleasant, that's easy to interact with, and not giving a lot of difficulties and a lot of challenges.
It's all about customer experience in the end. Eh?
Yeah.
So the consumer or the customer, that's the key here. Got it. Do you think there is a difference in approach whether you go for an on-prem or a cloud approach? Is there anything difference between an on-prem or a cloud, or what's your takeaway there?
On the cloud, we have additional challenges. Every cloud provider is established as an internet provider. In other words, even from the beginning, with the first Amazon services they provided for storage and compute, they provided them as web services. That's why they call it Amazon Web Services, because that was, you accessed them through a web service interface. It was all remote access. There is no operations team in the cloud that you can call. Everything is done by APIs. Everything is done over the internet. So when you're deploying on the cloud and working on the cloud, it's almost by default that your APIs and your programs are exposed out to the internet, because that's how it's oriented.
Of course,
you have to
yes.
Therefore much more careful and much more rigorous about controlling the access, which means all the APIs that you develop in the cloud, all the APIs you integrate from the different SaaS providers that are running in the cloud, all of these integrations have to have very strong identity management and very strong security associated with them for the authentication systems. And on top of that, there's another consideration that's very important for the cloud, which is all of your applications, most of them, I should say, are using some kind of a shared cloud service. And these shared services are used by hundreds of other companies. You don't have a dedicated database for yourself when you're using cloud storage. It's the same storage system that everyone is using, meaning that locking it down, that particular part that you need to use, and especially, when I was at Citi, this was something we really had to worry about, is because the integrity of customer data. This is, in fact, legal issue, compliance issue, never mind reputational issue on the front page of the newspaper if we lose data the way Capital One did. And the Capital One lost it exactly for this reason. They did not lock down the data in their shared data store in AWS to the point where it was what you might call least privilege access. An overprivileged account was able to override the encryption and access the data. So when you're in the cloud, you really need to be careful about not only the authentication, but also the authorization, to make sure that the authorization roles associated with the login ID are controlling the access to the shared resources to the point that you cannot allow somebody who, even if they break into your API, they can access the data from your sensitive data or other people's data, which means somebody else could break into another API that's not even yours, get at the database and get your data.
Get the data,
yeah. So this is another consideration. Everything has to be very clearly and more carefully controlled. And on top of that, all of these controls are done by APIs. So if you want to change the configuration of a storage from private to network, it's an API call. And some of your developers are going to make these API calls. And you have to be able to control that as well. So it's another whole category of carefulness that you have to take into consideration because of the shared nature of the clouds.
Yeah, and actually that comes back to security by design. So already in your software development phase, you should take care of this, that whether you're on-prem or the cloud, you should take that in consideration all the way to the data layer and back again.
Absolutely.
And maybe that's also a good one when you are looking for a professional CIAM solution. I think maybe this is one of the consideration when you're selecting a product or a solution that fits in your software stack. So are there any kind of mission critical decision points? How should a customer decide which CIAM solution to take?
Well, this is, again, back to my Citi experience. We first, when we were moving to the cloud, assumed that our internal employee identity access management system would work equally in the cloud. But of course, over time, we found out that it could not because of these additional capabilities, these additional considerations,
Exactly.
as well as the need to have something more cloud native and more cloud friendly. And it was hard to run an identity access management system on-prem to control the identities on cloud. This was creating a lot of difficulties as well. So it has to be a rethink of how it's done, not only because the cloud considerations are somewhat different, also because the customer considerations are somewhat different from the employee considerations. And finally, because yes, you want to make sure when you start your program that you're thinking about these things to make sure that when you get to the end, you're not finding some unpleasant surprises that cause you to have to do a lot of rework. So you want to make this as smooth, as easy as possible, and to have everything in code is something that we find is going to be very helpful. So you can put into your code, your company's policies, your company's standards, make them available for the developers that are working on their cloud applications, and have it right in their IDEs just as they need it, because
by nature,
it's just there. Because it's also, it's not always easy to find developers who understand all these security aspects of these things, especially for the cloud, where skills are even more, it's even more challenging to find cloud skills than on-prem skills. So it makes it even more important for selecting an IAM solution that you have something very friendly and easy for developers who are not so skilled in security to implement these things.
So that's one of the key elements for selecting an identity management solution.
Well, I would say so, because it's a key thing we are working on. So we hope, I hope we are right about this.
Then it should be indeed. So maybe as one of the last questions, I know WSO2 already for many years, and also most of the great products coming out of the WSO2 company. So what's the future of identity management from WSO2? What can we expect from WSO2 in the coming years regarding identity management?
We're very close followers of the standards, and we see a lot of emerging work in biometrics and in passwordless that we'll be adding. We'll be adding more federation, more workflow, B2B workflow types of integrations with security and with the APIs. So we're going to integrate our API management solution with our identity access management solution more closely over time, especially as we move to the cloud.
Right.
And more of the work is involved in putting APIs together. We're going to make sure that's all secure. Then we're going to follow the standards for additional multi-factor authentication systems that come out, different applications. SMS is getting challenged as in terms of how reliable is this now that people are breaking into phone networks and things like this. We want to have alternatives, different on-prem apps, YubiKeys, on-device apps, YubiKeys, other types of passwordless authentication that are coming up, as I mentioned, relying more on keys and encryption than on passwords. So we're looking at all of this and trying to make this all as seamless and easy as possible for people to include in their apps, and give the customers that great experience that they're looking for from those apps.
Sounds actually like very innovative, and to be honest, I think you are top notch there, and I'm looking forward to those new product lines, so to speak. So I think it's clear for customers now that there is actually a difference between CIAM and traditional identity management. So you cannot do one without the other. I understand that part, and one of the key takeaways for me, at least, is security by design. I love the idea to put it in front of your project instead of something you do in the end. So basically, my understanding, CIAM is here to stay, and it's very critical that we look at the end consumer and the end customer instead of looking at technology at all of the time.
I think that's a great summary.
Oh, thank you. So thank you so much for sharing your experience, and maybe we can do this sometime in the future again.
Absolutely.
And let's hope that in the coming months, WSO2 is coming with great new products on the market. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much
joining me.
Thank you very much.